My hope is that this will help to break the spell. The spell that so many people are under. That keeps them angry, makes them bitter, blinds them from the truth, and realize that they're being deceived, that they've been lied to, that we've all been lied to our entire life. My hope is that people will begin to wake up.
If you care to think at all, it's very clear that something is going on here. There's something to this, man. Have we been lied to this whole time?
The whole idea of using slavery today as an excuse for the crime and dysfunction in the Black community doesn't make a lot of sense. If you look at the Blacks that came out of slavery, they were relatively prosperous, and you did not have the dysfunction and crime that you see taking place today. Black people are constantly being told that because of slavery, because of systemic racism, that their anger and their bitterness and their rage is justified.
Is it possible that as Black people, we are experiencing a PTSD from what they went through 401 years ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just because we didn't experience it, us learning about the history or even from family stories, it's the same thing.
That does not make a lot of sense, given that Blacks coming out of slavery had lives that were more functional. The functionality of Black lives at the turn of the century was because Blacks were deeply religious people. They adhered to strong Judeo-Christian values and principles. And to the extent that they get further and further away from those principles, I think that you see more dysfunction in Black communities because they've lost the anchor.
Church was the central point. It was the center point of social gathering, culture, religious activity, everything. Every Sunday, you woke up, you had breakfast with your mom and dad, and then all of us came out of the house at the same time, and we start walking toward Sunday school. Even if you couldn't sing, you're going to be in the youth choir. And then Wednesday, you would go to youth Bible study. And then the summer, you go to church retreat camp. Those were just expected things. And that formed a fundamental basis of the Black community. It was that sense of right and wrong. It was that sense of morality. It was that sense of discipline that we had.
The church was producing hope. It produced within the community a stability of purpose. It held us together. Families were strong. Dad was there. Mom was there. The children were growing up under the influence of a two-parent home. That all changed.
It's not because of racism. It's not because of police brutality. It's not because of slavery. It's not because of Jim Crow. It's not because of white supremacists and white privilege and all that crap they're telling you now. It's because of lack of character.
This the gutter right.
Black people lost character. Look at all the neighborhoods, the communities, the cities where blacks have taken over. When they move into those areas, they're very nice, but by the time the blacks are done with them, crime, homelessness, they don't paint their homes, they don't clean up. It's just become a mess. It's because of lack of family, and most black people today do not believe in God. They believe about him, but they don't believe in him. It wasn't that way when I was growing up, but it's that way today.
If you walk through any black urban community, you see many black men standing on corners doing nothing.
Get this paper. That's the only thing you can do, unless these niggas won't smoke, you know?
Okay.
Young, middle-aged, and old. Because they're operating under a definition that is different from what God has defined for them as their role as men.
Sometimes I'm ashamed of black people. That is not black culture. That's a facade. Throughout history, black folks were honorable. They had integrity. That's what black people were. But now, our black people are Jay-Z, Cardi B, George Floyd.
We like to deify our idols. Now that's after we've burned down our own stores. After we've destroyed our own neighborhoods. After we rob our own local businesses. After there are no more sneakers to steal. Then we'll paint murals on the wall. Our young black boys and black girls are being taught to look up to these individuals. That the purpose in life is to be memorialized on a wall like this.
Images are powerful. You look on churches, powerful images of saints and figures from the Bible, and the goal to communicate the meta-narrative of Scripture. Who we are, why we're here, what's wrong with the world, and how can what is wrong be made right. Your worldview, your religion answers those questions. What we're seeing today is another religion communicating another meta-narrative and another worldview. And these murals are the stained glass windows of this new religion. I see the supremacy of Christ being challenged. What did Marx hate? He hated God. This is a war against God. And I don't want to see people deceived.
Why is Black Lives Matter important for the U.S. right now and in the world?
Black Lives Matter is our call to action.
He was concerned that there's a lack of ideological direction in Black Lives Matter.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Communism Communism begins with this German named Karl Marx. 100 years ago, he created the theory of communism in one of his books.
If you have the founders of Black Lives Matter saying that they're trained Marxists, how does Marxism relate to the black community? If you're talking about a community that is deeply rooted in the Judeo-Christian faith heritage, then how do you make that connection?
This is the book, an official copy printed in Moscow, which explains that communism is based on two main ideas: that all religion is bad and that all private property is bad. Therefore, Marx said, religion must be destroyed.
It was Karl Marx who says, my goal in life is to dethrone God and to destroy capitalism.
His thinking and his writing concentrated on relationships of power. He looked at the world as divided between those who controlled the means of production and those who didn't. Those who had power, and those who did not. Those who were oppressors and those who were oppressed. The haves and the have-nots. The bourgeois and the proletariat.
Karl Marx was inspired by inequities that he saw in society, and he felt that religion was behind the reluctance of people to actually rise up and overthrow the oppressors. He saw God as an enemy because Christians are willing to trust God in their circumstances. Karl Marx very famously said that religion was the opiate of the masses.
We have seen that communism got its start in Russia during the chaos and confusion which followed World War I. They promised peace and food, but have brought only war and starvation to their victims.
If the devil came with red horns and a pitchfork, everybody would run. He's a deceiver. This is a deception.
Their message was seductive. It addressed their sorrow, addressed their oppression and their pain. They gave a message that says that we can help you with that.
What they offered was attractive.
Because what socialism promises is a utopia. It promises heaven on earth.
That we can have that which God promises without God.
That man is the ultimate intellect and ultimate entity in the universe. That he can construct and develop a utopia that will usher in peace, tranquility, and unity of the human race.
A peace that the world has not yet known. And if we hunker down and come together all in pursuit of this heaven on earth, then we can accomplish that.
What communism offers, what humanism offers, is a stolen version of Christianity that tries to erase God, but still satisfy that desire in the human heart to see all things made right.
For me, it was real simple. As a young lieutenant back in 1985, I was on a deployment with my unit to West Berlin. And we went through Checkpoint Charlie. When I came out on the other side to East Berlin, I was like, oh, hell no. I don't want to live like that. 1995, I'm stationed in South Korea, near the DMZ. And I look across and I see North Korea. I saw socialism. I saw Marxism. I saw communism up front and in person. When people have the scales taken off their eyes, then they can see clearly.
Today, if you ask the average person, do you know what socialism is? Do you know what communism is? They do not know.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Our movement, at the core of it, we believe in the liberation of every single human being. What structure will get us there? Not our current ones. We can see that right now because of COVID-19. Who's being impacted the most by COVID-19?
Our enemies are our children and our grandchildren, because they believe in that deceptive lie.
12 people are arrested during Sunday's Black Lives Matter protests in Richmond. They fit the description of Antifa members.
Across the country, Confederate statues and
a bust of Abraham Lincoln was found torched.
Will protesters topple a statue of Christopher Columbus?
Statue of Thomas Jefferson because
hundreds of statues have been vandalized or taken down since the death of George Floyd.
On Tuesday, protesters set their sights on the Emancipation Memorial, the landmark paid for by freed slaves and now over 140 years old, facing calls to be removed.
You see people trying to rewrite history. You see them tear down statues and rename everything.
The American people know these names have to go.
Why is that?
New York has decided to remove a statue of Teddy Roosevelt in the face of growing criticism.
The statue clearly presents a white man as superior to people of color.
Because your history gives you your identity, and your identity is the basis of your beliefs.
In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville came to America to study this country. The Europeans were fascinated. How could a fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, already be competing with them on virtually every level? This was impossible. De Tocqueville was going to sort it out. And he looked at our educational system. See, that anybody finishing the second grade was completely literate. He could find a mountain man on the outskirts of society. The man could read the newspaper, could have a political discussion, could tell him how the government worked. The people who founded this nation said that our system of government was designed for a well-informed and educated populace. And when they become less informed, they become vulnerable.
Black! Run! We do not comply with the regime putting targets on the backs of black people, brown communities, and Native people. We do not comply with the regime denying women control of their bodies.
The people shouldn't have to hold the state accountable. The state should just be accountable. Power to the people. Power to the people.
The communists have admittedly chosen the minds of our youth as a #1 area for their insidious attack.
An accurate summary of Lenin's strategy for the conquest of the world is as follows.
First, we will take Eastern Europe. Next, the masses of Asia. Then we shall encircle the last bastion of capitalism, the United States of America. We will not have to attack. It will fall like overripe fruit into our hands.
Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher, a communist, who said this: we will never defeat the West with guns and conflict, but rather we will defeat them through infiltration.
To change America's hegemony, its moral structure,
Today, an overwhelming majority of U.S. educators are convinced
they had to do it gradually, slowly, generation by generation.
The fruit of an educational system that has totally destroyed our country. You're seeing the impact of Marxian ideas, the impact of secular humanism in the schools.
Ideological subversion, that is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism. And you can see it quite clearly that the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. Not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system.
It's ironic, black people in America are the freest, safest, most prosperous black people in the history of the world. There is no country in this world that a black person would rather be. Unless, of course, they grow up in this country. Then they're fed a lie that is so deceptive, they actually believe the opposite of that which is true.
The system in America was never built for black people because that system has never been changed. Those documents has never been altered. These things were made back in the 1800s, and these are the same exact literature that's down today. So if it's the same...
There are people lining up, black people, trying to get in line for a lottery in their country, for just a chance to come to America. But if you hear many black Americans speak, you would think that this is a place, number one, that they shouldn't want to come to, but number two, that black people here should be fleeing from. The reason that that lie exists is because of power.
Manning Johnson was an American Negro who loved his country, and he loved it enough that he saw beyond Uncle Tom. A communist of stature within the international conspiracy, Manning Johnson had the strength to renounce communism when he discovered for certain that its purpose was to use the Negro as a device to help commit all Americans of all colors to a slavery far worse than anything the pre-emancipation American Negro had ever experienced. We preserve the speech on this record for posterity, and we present it with malice toward none, but rather with the belief that had its wisdom and sheer logic reached enough Americans at the time the speech was made, the communists never could have succeeded in provoking the violence and insurrection we have unhappily witnessed. Now, Manning Johnson.
Don't spread the rumor throughout the world that Negroes are kept in ignorance because of prejudiced white people and all of that propaganda, because that type of propaganda is the brainchild of the communists. And they want to use the Negro to gain foothold in those parts of the world where the darker races exist. They don't give a tinker's damn about a Negro. There are certain people who are using the Negro in order to establish their power in Washington. And the Negro is just merely a pawn in a game that's bigger than he is.
Black people were always ripe for use by the communists because many of us do come from situations of poverty.
I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to be coming back to see you. And we are going to be demanding when we go to Washington that something be done and done immediately about these conditions.
It's taking the economic Marxism of Karl Marx and applying it to race relations in a way that whites are the oppressors and minorities, non-whites, they are the oppressed.
We have to recognize who our major enemy is. The major enemy is not your brother, flesh of your flesh and blood of your blood. The major enemy is the hunky and his institutions of racism. That's the major enemy. And whenever anybody prepares for revolutionary warfare, you concentrate on the major enemy. We're not strong enough to fight.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat.
What we're covering is a very layered thing. We're talking about over a century of tactics, writings, education, journalism, music, film, all these different vehicles being used to carry out this ideology.
Many of our people's minds have been whitewashed. If a Negro comes up to you and you turn your back on him, he's got to run to the hunky. We're going to take time and patience with our people because they're ours. They're ours.
It's very clear. There was an intention to use black people
Rotten, fascist, racist,
to be a constant annoyance.
In the summer of 1964, widespread rioting and looting suddenly broke out in Harlem, Rochester, Newark, Jersey City, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Chicago, all within a few days of each other. It was as though an unseen hand had given the signal.
As a Jew, I have a certain amount of, shall we say, congenital social protest inside of me. Because my people have been pushed around, well, you know, from the beginning of time.
Buffalo, New York, riots break out. I want to make it crystal clear that as mayor that we will not tolerate a violation of the law. We will not tolerate criminal activity. We will not tolerate looting and pillaging.
Power has always gone into two areas, those who have money and those who have people. We have nothing but people. And the politicians understand this.
After 4 nights of violence and $100,000 damage, the mayor promises to do something about employment opportunities within a week, if they will cool off.
We were only in there for about a month and a half when Buffalo blew. We weren't even organized. And even our critics...
His name is Saul Alinsky, and there are still many to whom the name is meaningless. But to millions now, he is looked on as a savior. And these are the so-called have-nots, the culturally deprived, the abject poor.
Saul Alinsky is the father of community organizing and the progressivism that you see manifested across America.
People do not get power except when they take it, or when they're strong enough so that the other side gives it up.
He was a Marxist, but he was very practical.
If you force an issue over too long a period, you can run into some real troubles. Let me tell you one of...
And he was into tactics.
You tell them that the next time we meet, we'll meet in front of the United States Senate, in the hearings room, and they'll come there because they won't get an invitation. They'll be coming in response to a subpoena.
He wrote a very famous book called Rules for Radicals.
It is, without a doubt, the strategic playbook, as well as the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. Those are the two seminary documents for the progressive socialist left in America today.
What you find when you read these people and you really study them is that it's nothing for them to be deceitful and to be manipulative and to lie in order to get their ideas to come to pass.
The real question has never been a silly one about the end justifying the means. It's always been, does this particular end justify this particular means?
His dedication tells you everything. He dedicated his book to Lucifer.
As being the first revolutionary to be able to establish his own kingdom.
Now everybody understands what white power is because they own the banks. They have all the commercial power in the community. But they only have it at the expense.
This is from the Canadian documentary that was done on Saul Alinsky, Organizing for Power, the Alinsky Approach.
The Alinsky organization is often invited into a community by its churchmen. Franklin Delano Roosevelt Florence, a minister of the Church of Christ, is elected president of the organization, which names itself FIGHT, Freedom, Independence, God, Honor, Today. In its first year, FIGHT achieves modest victories against the city administration in the area of urban renewal and attacks anyone who doesn't offer uncritical support.
All these different movements that were popping up in industrial cities in the 60s and 70s.
We're sick and tired of this Uncle Tom leadership. That's why we have bills here.
People thought that these were black organizations, ran by black people, for the uplift of black people. People genuinely thought that.
I want to comment about the outside agitators that the mayor claims is coming into Buffalo to create the disorders.
What these short films of Saul Alinsky showed is that it was actually white Marxists.
Alinsky sent in Dick Harmon as staff director.
Once I give the word to go, we're off. There will be no turning back.
Alinsky sends in Ed Chambers, his top organizer. Chambers works quickly to set up the local organization in time to avoid another summer of violence.
Every organization that we build is built on a multi-issued basis. The worst thing you can do, and one of the reasons why some of the civil rights or a large part of the civil rights movement went dead, is to organize around a single issue. It becomes a straitjacket.
Number one, chronic unemployment of adults and teenagers. Number two, inferior education. Number three, your slumlords. Number four, police brutality. Number five, the lack of recreation facilities. There's one swimming pool to every 50,000 Negroes, and there are...
Take a single issue, and you literally lock out a large part of potential membership who may be sympathetic to the...
It was very surprising to find this footage because it puts his words out there. It puts the strategy out there that communists and Marxists and socialists, whatever you want to call them, that they've been putting into practice for a very long time.
The beautiful execution of power.
You had these black pastors taking marching orders.
One spokesman is always selected.
May I have your attention, please? We're going to the mayor's office and then to the Chamber of Commerce. I'm Reverend Fletcher Bryant, who will be the spokesman. I am the spokesman, one spokesman for the organization. A week ago,
He is told that he's got to have a specific question and stay with it.
a specific requests in regard to jobs in the face of a crisis in job inequities in the Negro community.
Some 916 jobs appear to be available. That includes the 600 jobs that the county is making available.
Never let the mayor get off the
But then you're saying that they have not delivered at this point. And the second point I'd like to
you're
raise...
saying it. I'm not saying
This
it.
is one thing in terms of tactics. You sit with a political leader and you say, this is the question.
Are these jobs of a temporary or permanent nature?
I haven't got the full specifics on them. Some of them will be...
You don't hear him. Do you recognize us or don't you?
Well, let me at this time, Mr. Mayor, make crystal clear Bill's position on this job matter.
To the extent that you have black pastors involved.
Minister Florence, were you successful in getting the Kodak stockholders list?
These were just black frontmen.
They denied us the right to see it again. Same racist tactic.
Saul Alinsky is very strategic in what he's doing.
Minister Florence interrupted him, calling for a point of order.
He's very calculated in his approach to organize people and to affect change.
If you don't give us our shit!
It made me think about Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter is a modern organization.
The reality is that race in the United States operates on a spectrum from black to white.
The prevailing narrative is that 3 black women who are concerned about black people, who love black people. These are the women who started Black Lives Matter, and that it's a black movement, and every white person associated with it is merely an ally.
It is a tool for our allies to show up differently for us.
I was wondering, is there a white Marxist behind Black Lives Matter?
Displacement, genocide, and climate crimes. Is that a laundry list or a web of connected crises? Our next guest has been helping people's movements make the links for decades now. He's Eric Mann of the Labor Community Strategy Center right here in Los Angeles. How did you get started?
Well, I come out of a Jewish socialist.
What I found is Eric Mann.
I've been organizing with the Congress of Racial Equality, Students for Democratic Society, worked with the Black Panther Party, was in SDS, was in Weatherman, went to prison for political issues.
When you look into Eric Mann, you look at what he believes and what he wants.
Free the U.S. 2 million prisoners and 100,000 less police. Free, safe, and legal abortion with public support and financing, and minors having the right to abortion without parental consent. Reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, unconditional amnesty and option of citizenship for 12 million immigrants, end the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on gangs, and the war on terror.
After you put these ideas out, you got to train organizers, and we have been able to recruit young Black and Latino kids.
My name is Patrisse Cullors. I am the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. I'm also the executive director of the Black Lives Matter Global Network.
She came out of the bus riders union. She's grown up in South LA. Patrisse wants the stage. In some way wants to occupy it.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to win.
You work with each person to say, you need to lead. I only have an army of generals.
I do believe in Marxism. It's a philosophy that I learned really early on in my organizing career. We were taught to learn about the systems that were criticizing capitalism.
Whenever Patrisse Cullors said we're trained Marxists, she was telling the truth. She's a trained Marxist. And Eric Mann is the man who trained her.
I spend my time right now organizing mainly young people that want to be revolutionaries. Young, primarily women, Black, Latina, Asian.
It's essentially based on guerrilla warfare principles, which is you're up against a far more powerful enemy. And you have a very small little army, and you're trying to figure out what this little army that maybe at best is like a flea bite
You know, how do you kill an elephant with flea bites?
We start with the intersection of the Black and Latino community as a strategic alliance that's central to building a broader multiracial left.
This is the father of Black Lives Matter.
The Black trans women who have been murdered.
To the extent that Black people are involved, these are useful idiots. These are people who are fronts to carry out the agenda of white Marxists.
If we don't have a base in the Black and Latino community, we can't branch out. You gotta have a strategy, and that's at least my strategy. We don't believe that majority white organizations can be transformative organizations.
Black Lives Matter, it's a white-run organization. It's a white movement. And it's all about destroying America and using people of color in the process.
And so it has been, with but minor variations in one country after another. Divide the people. Get them fighting among themselves rather than their common enemy. For well do they know that the nation so divided and weakened can be easily conquered from within.
This entire block
Create the appearance of popular support
George Floyd
through a favorable press and the use of terror, intimidation, and the creation of martyrs. Make the world believe the revolution is a popular one, particularly among those being liberated. Neutralize the opposition.
This guy right here is a racist. He's a white supremacist.
When obstructionists to the cause become too irritating, label them as fascist, Nazi, anti-Semitic, extremist, racist, controversial. Precipitate mob violence. Get the mobs into the streets. March and demonstrate. As the demonstrations grow in number and intensity, they will acquire political character through the desired collision and open combat with the forces of law and order.
We're watching young people being informed by people who are leveraging their emotion.
They don't realize that they have been drawn into a very radical movement where their lives will be taken over.
When I came to the organization, when I was organized into the organization, I was 17 and a half. I was really angry, and I didn't have a direction. I just was spewing anger. I was angry at.
Anytime you want to start a movement or you want to brainwash the people, you have to deal with those who are angry.
If you're not angry, you're not with me.
Then the communist movement can come in and pretend to be a friend to use you.
1968. The wheels were coming off the wagons. Dr. King was assassinated. We became white race conscious.
Now they after the white people, they gonna congregate. They gonna caravan out in Inglewood, Playa del Rey, and everywhere else the white man is supposed to stay. They gonna do the white man in tonight, and I'm gonna wait now.
We went from being the nice Catholic kid to the angry black kid. I was angry about things that happened in the past. I was angry about things that were gonna happen in the future. If you said good morning to me, I was angry. If you didn't say good morning, I was angry. And people exploited that. I remember going to Harvard Square. All night we were rioting. And I got back home. I couldn't explain to myself why I just did that.
You will be used, you will be taken advantage of because you cannot see what you're getting into. You can't see.
The first conscious act in organizing our people is to let them know who they are. If you think you're an American, you will fight to protect the interests of capitalist America. If you know you ain't no American, you fight to destroy every aspect of American capitalism.
All of us come from somewhere. All of us have origin stories. Why do I, as a black man, have this nice, wholesome German name? It's because of slavery. It's important for me to know that story. But it's also important for me to recognize that as an American, I have another origin story. And that origin story is not 1619. It's 1776. Because that's America's origin story. And I am an American. And that origin story is filled with suffering and struggle and bloodshed and overcoming adversity. An Irish person whose family survived the Irish potato famine and then came to America. It's part of our origin story as America. My Jewish brother whose family survived the Holocaust and then came to the United States. You could go on and on and on, and what you eventually realize is that God, in His providence, has brought us all from hardship.
Divine providence was clearly operating in the lives of Black Americans. Yes, slavery was horrible, but out of slavery came Black America. If you look at the accomplishments of Blacks throughout history, that would not have happened had they not come to America. We are blessed.
It is a great satisfaction to have connected with the race of men and women who are able to do something that enhances the comforts and conveniences of life. As you go on, increasing your ability to do things of value, you will find that the problem, which often nowadays looks more and more difficult of solution, will gradually become easier.
Booker T. Washington was my hero. When I was in high school, they used to take us over to Tuskegee. Every summer, we would spend a week over there, staying in the dorm and learning about Booker T. Washington. A lot of Black people don't understand what he was all about.
When he came to Alabama, when he came to Tuskegee, he pushed work, industry, and the books. He didn't have pity on these former slaves.
We must recognize the fact that our capacity is very largely different from that of the people of the white race. I know we like to say the opposite. It sounds well in compositions, does well in rhetoric, and makes a splendid essay. But to say that we are equal to whites is to say that slavery was no disadvantage to us. This is all we can say of ourselves. With proper development, our condition and capacity will be the same as those of the people of any other race.
He was influencing people to take advantage of their own lives, do the best with what they had.
Getting out there and working hard and earning things on your own. Be an entrepreneur. Start your own business. Build your community.
We need to look to ourselves. We need to transform from within.
He urged black people to set your bucket where you are and make your success right there where you are.
Cast down your bucket where you are. A third and fourth speaker for Walker was asked, cast down your bucket where you are. Captain of the first person, last, he instructed, cast down your bucket.
It is said that necessity is the mother of invention. The need to have goods and products available to us in our community, entrepreneurs came up. Black stores, black doctors and dentists and other professionals established their business, influenced by a Judeo-Christian ethic that says if you don't work, you don't eat. A Judeo-Christian ethic that talked about the father to be the provider and to take care of the family. Innovation and creativity produced the kind of responsiveness that we see take place. Texas, Georgia, Atlanta was bustling. Oklahoma.
No one ever loses anything by being a gentleman or a lady. No person ever lost anything by being broad. Remember that if we are kind and useful, if we are moral, no matter what people say about us, they cannot pull us down. But on the other hand, if we are without the spirit of usefulness, if we are without morality, without economy and property, without all those qualities which go to make a people and a nation great and strong, no matter what we say about ourselves, we are losing ground. Nobody can give us these qualities merely by praising us and talking well about us. And when we possess them, nobody can take them from us by speaking ill of us.
When you look at these pictures, you get a sense of what Black life was like in an era where we're told that Black people were unhappy.
Some of them look pretty prosperous.
Richard Samuel Roberts, he captured almost 2 decades of Black life in the South during a time when today we're told Black people could not mobilize upward. And in these photos, it tells a true story.
After slavery ended, there were a lot of very successful Black people. They abounded in a lot of different places.
I grew up down in Alabama. When I was growing up, we were not raised to hate. We were never taught that America was bad and that we were not Americans. We were raised to love America. We were taught about slavery, but not in a way where it made you hate. My family and other Black people around me were working their own land. Those that wanted to go to college went to college, or they started their own business.
My father was born in 1915 in the Jim Crow South, Athens, Georgia. My father always taught my brothers and me that when the door is wide open, I never felt like I was a victim. I never even felt we were poor. I remember thinking my father was rich. I remember asking my father for a quarter, and he went in his pocket and he gave it to me. I thought, my dad was rich. My dad was a janitor.
Elder did not come to his politics by accident. His father, Randolph, was dirt poor with little education. He went to night school, held down 2 jobs, and raised a family.
He was a janitor until I was 10 years old. Then he started a little small business, a cafe not too far from downtown LA. And my father was always about working hard and not making excuses.
When Larry says, look, if you just forget the issue of racism, just put your head down, study hard, work hard, you're going to be all right in the end. You think that's true?
It worked for me. It worked for me.
That was Black America, but it's an America that we don't learn about, specifically because whenever you have something to be proud of, people have less of a chance of controlling you.
It has now gotten to the point where it is impossible for me to believe Black leaders and the Black struggle in America. I see the lies and the manipulation from the media, Black leaders, the dumb, ignorant, cowardice, brain dead people who are ruining our country on a false narrative. I'm willing to deny 90% of what people are saying.
You know, I imagine the slaves.
Here's why.
Thought, thank God we're gonna all be one.
The first legal slave owner was a Black man. Hundreds of Black people owned slaves during slavery. But yet our entire plight of the Black community is because of slavery. Look at the 1920s and 30s when Black Wall Street was around and Black people prospered. Black people were successful, they were working hard, they were building things. Concentration of Black success and wealth in the 20s and 30s that we don't even see today after the Civil Rights Movement. I'm starting to become skeptical of the Civil Rights Movement. We are not told the entire truth of the Civil Rights Movement. Because Martin Luther King was a socialist.
Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Are we just hearing his one speech and people are glorifying his one speech?
This part of Oklahoma was not the only place in the United States where Black people were doing well. There are all sorts of Black neighborhoods like that throughout the entire South. The fact is, those schoolhouses aren't standing today. Those businesses aren't standing today. It wasn't white racism that destroyed it.
And we are going to demand that the government do something about these conditions, and we're going to demand that they stop cutting off poverty funds, which end up often making the rich richer and the poor poorer. Now, we're going to do this, and I just want you to know.
Now, he acted like a good nigga for the white folk. But I tell you, I don't want to even be around no more good niggas. I'm with them, no good Negroes. That's what they call Rodriguez, a good Negro. I want to be with the bad niggas, because I know what's happening with the bad niggas. That's where I want to be. I want to be with the niggas.
The thing that killed all these Black businesses was a mindset change as a result of the Civil Rights Movement.
That is a major, tragic, and staggering depression that we face in our everyday lives.
The rats is sleeping with me and my kids, and why should I pay the rent? I'll go to court if you want me to.
How you gonna tell me to love this property that exploits me every day when the average Black man in Harlem works the first Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for a landlord?
The thing that killed all this Black success was rhetoric.
Racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realize.
You guys have spent 60 years complaining about white people, where in the good old days when men were men and boys were boys, blacks were not doing that. They went out.
When was this time, Jesse? Please
Before
enlighten me and the
That's a good
listeners.
question.
When was that time?
Before the civil rights movement.
Booker T. Washington, through his Tuskegee machine, started what was called the Negro Business League. One of the proteges was a man named Philip Payton. Encouraged by Booker T. Washington, particularly his message of buying property, went to New York and saw an opportunity to buy one of the buildings there in Harlem, which was predominantly white at the time. So he bought this building, and then he began to buy more and more buildings. He started an Afro-American Realty Company. This began to spread, and other black realtors began to do the same thing. This was in the early 1900s, between 1900 and 1910. People began to migrate to Harlem. Individuals who were educated in the South. They were coming to Harlem not as dumb, ignorant former slaves, but as individuals who had education, who had skills. They brought with them all of the ingredients to really thrive and to really make it, and they were determined to make it. They became the black bourgeoisie. The narrative that we have today is that black people were always at the mercy of white people. That black people came with their hands out, and it was really up to the white person as to whether they will allow black people to exist or not.
I'm old enough to tell you all that. You're all not old enough to know that yet. When I was a kid, see, we had something. We weren't looking for any social integration. You know why? Because we had our own businesses there. We had our own cab companies. We had our own restaurants. We had our own hotels. We had our own school systems. My family was part of one that had the only black bus line in the entire United States. All of our mechanics was blacks. All of our drivers were blacks. Electricians was black. Everything was black. We don't kill our buses.
Right.
Social integration. When all of a sudden, you all started talking about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King going down to Alabama, want to integrate the bus lines. Integrate whose bus line?
I have always ridden in the back of the bus because I didn't have guts to get in the front of the bus. But now the time had come. I was riding in the front of the bus.
Like in Winston-Salem says, we want to ride on front of some white buses. So we said, we don't have any white buses. They said, well, get some so we can ride on the front of them.
I feel like a complete asshole because I never thought about that. Like that whole time they did the boycott, they should have been trying to establish their own bus company as opposed to wanting to ride. I never thought about that. Y'all boycotted for a year just to want to ride on the front?
See, you're a smart man.
I never thought about that.
but you got it now, right?
In 1905, black people were literally buying entire buildings. This idea that blacks were always at the mercy of whites is just asinine, at least when it came to Booker T. Washington and the effect that he had on those who put his ideas into practice. He really pushed vocation, learning skilled trades, becoming your own man, taking responsibility of your own communities. And then you saw this large exodus of black people out of those skilled trades.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many of them left work?
Because they fell for the lie of the so-called black leadership.
In the slave South,
Negroes impoverished and mistreated have sought remedy by pouring into the cities.
W.B. Du Bois is a towering figure in Black intellectual history. And oftentimes people will pit Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois against one another. Up from slavery, Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, the souls of black folk. Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee Institute. W.B. Du Bois, the NAACP.
The NAACP collects billions of dollars for racial incitement. They go out of their way to create race issues, because the more race issues they create, the more they've got an appeal for begging for funds. But what do they do with that money? They do not spend one single cent to build any factories or shops to create jobs or to contribute to the development of free enterprise in our country. They're not interested in that.
They wanted to be the head of black people. W.B. Du Bois was a traitor. He was an enemy of black people and America. A socialist, a communist.
It was Mary White Ovington and other white socialists who started the NAACP. White socialists who sought to use black Americans to carry out their socialist agenda. They needed a black face. That's where W.E.B. Du Bois came in, to be the perceived leader, to appear as amiable to the black masses, to Trojan horse this radical ideology.
This nation tries to prove its prosperity by balancing monopolized wealth of the owners of great corporations against the poverty of our lower third.
The NAACP was started by a white socialist woman, not a black man. Whenever the NAACP began to take off, you had men like W.E.B. Du Bois trying to make a name for themselves. In order to make a name for themselves, they needed to sabotage men like Booker T. Washington, who had influence.
Unfortunately, it's only a Negro minority of intellectuals and leftist Negro preachers who presume to speak for all of the Negro people. They try to silence all opposition by calling anybody who disagrees with them Uncle Toms.
They want to disparage Booker T. Washington as the Uncle Tom. Booker T. Washington is this ultimate picture of the black person who gives the white people what they want and lets them off the hook. And W.B. Du Bois is this hero because he airs the grievances and he calls white people to account.
Which is interesting because he was born to freed men. He was born well off. He didn't know what it was like to be raised in the South. Booker T. Washington was born and raised in the South. He was born into slavery. There was a way of simplicity about Washington. He was a very confident man. He was a man of faith. Du Bois was an atheist, very troubled and very paranoid. He was educated at Harvard, where he was trained to look with disdain at Western civilization and at capitalism in particular. And he saw Booker T. Washington as his intellectual enemy because Washington pushed utilizing capitalism instead of trying to do away with it.
You will find it true, not only in this country, but in other countries, that the demand will be more and more for people who can do something. Regardless of color or condition, the world is going to give the places of trust and remuneration to men and women who can do a certain thing as well as anybody else or better. Just in proportion as we do this, you will find that nothing under the sun will keep us back.
I was able to look at this book called Harlem, A Century in Images. It gives you a timeline from its inception to its collapse. From the beginning, whether it's the kids in the classroom, the way that the people are dressed, the business owners, you see this classiness, that they're well put together, that they're self-respect, that they're dignified people. And then somewhere down the road, you have new players on the scene, preaching a certain message, a certain agitative, militant message. The faces go from being delighted, happy, and hopeful to all of a sudden being angry. The book captures, probably unknowingly, the story of Harlem.